So today I want to talk about wants and needs. You have to excuse my voice. I'm recovering from the flu. Um, and the reason I want to talk about wants and needs is because they're so important, integral, and there's something that even though we have them, we all have them, they're not something that we are formally taught to us in an effective way. And I know on my own journey and what I'm going through at the moment is like really exploring wants and needs and what am I allowed to want? Am I allowed to need? And what makes me needy and what can I have? And if you don't know what you want and need and what you're allowed to want and need, then what can happen in relationship is that you can be made to feel needy, even when what you are requesting is not. So, for instance, you can be labeled within a relationship, and this is something that I've personally experienced as being high maintenance. And then whenever you have a want or a need, you're being labeled as high maintenance. And then there's shame in that, in being high maintenance. And then you suppress this want and need and you start going without. So there are many, many different things that can happen that negatively impact us in our relationships with our friends and our family and also our loved ones when we are not sure of our wants and needs. So I want to go into this more. So there are two types of wants and needs. So, or needs, basically, there's independency needs and there's dependency needs. So independency needs are needs that we can meet ourselves, that we should meet ourselves. And then there are dependency needs, which are what we can rely on others to meet. Now, sometimes these dependency needs can also be interdependency needs. Okay, so I mean, if we're going to go for the full, journey of self-discovery and enlightenment and everything like that, basically what you're working there when you're working within yourself and the inner union is getting to a point where you're basically meeting all of your own needs yourself. But when you're in relationship, it's also then okay to have wants and needs. So there's this not having to, and this is one of the issues that I've had that I'm realizing within myself, is that I always set such a high bar of standard for myself that I've been setting this bar of standard for myself as like an enlightened person when I'm not an enlightened person. And then almost like starving myself of things and like he's like the monk whipping himself. Like I'm always flagellating myself and punishing myself for feeling certain ways and holding myself apart from things and making myself sit in my misery and my pain to work through my stuff. When in reality, sometimes you don't have to do that. I mean, it's one thing to observe a trigger, to recognize that it's your own shit, right? And to work through it. But sometimes when working through it is also getting to a process of recognizing that, you know what, I actually don't want to be in something that is creating this trigger in me continuously. And it doesn't actually serve me. And it's not loving to myself to be within this. So there's this dance between like becoming this perfect enlightened being who's not ruffled or not triggered by anything, like not having needs and wants met, versus recognizing that, you know what, this is actually an important need or an important want for me. And if this cannot be met, then this is not compatible, or I need to get it met elsewhere. So it's just being totally honest with ourselves, and there's 100% responsibility for yourself, for your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, your triggers. Okay, so when someone triggers us, they're not actually triggering us, we're being triggered, and taking responsibility for that. And being responsible for your needs and your wants and recognizing what they are, asking for them in a mature way, and also recognizing when maybe there's a need or a want that can be met elsewhere or that you should be meeting yourself. So the fulfillment of our needs allows us to be healthy and thriving and happy individuals. And what is the difference between a need and a want? So what I've been taught, and for the purpose of my teachings and when I'm talking to people, a need is something that is essential for your survival, and a want is something that's on top of that. So Alyssa Barron said, needs help us fill our cup, whereas wants are all those things that allow it to overflow. So needs are the thing that allow us to survive, and not just survive, but kind of more or when you think of survival, there's the levels of survival, and yeah, okay, so shelter is definitely a need. Okay, food and water, oxygen. So these are needs that are capable of survival, but there's also needs that are kind of more about connectivity. Because when we don't have connectivity and we don't have social interaction, then we actually are not mentally healthy. So those things like that are a need. So I've got a list here I'm going to read out to you. So food, shelter, clothing, medical dental attention, physical nurturing, emotional nurturing is actually a need. So when you're being labeled needy for needing emotional nurturing, it actually is a need for mental health. Now, obviously within this, there's always this dance of what is our attachment style from our childhood, and if our needs were inconsistently met and we have an attachment style wounding where we are anxious and this whole fear of rejection thing comes up, which does make us clingy, which does make us needy, then sometimes your emotional needs might be needy and you might need to pull it back and do some inner work and meet some of these needs yourself. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't need emotional stuff in our life, that connectivity is not important, that intimacy is not important. These things are so important. And for the last couple of years, I've been holding myself away from that, away from intimacy and away from connection, in a way like a punishment, because I felt guilty leaving, my husband, who is a good man, right? He wasn't physically abusive, he wasn't sexually abusive, he wasn't like aggressive. There's all, like, people would look at my relationship with my ex-husband and would think that it was an amazing relationship, but it wasn't meeting some very important needs for myself. And let's be honest here, on the flip side, I wasn't meeting important needs for him. And over the course of 27 years, we had just got to a point of separation where our needs and our wants weren't compatible anymore. And what we wanted in our life and our journeys that we were following, and our ability to express and to hold space for each other, it just wasn't working anymore. So I had to take myself away, but then I've been punishing myself by not allowing myself to have connectivity or intimacy since that moment. So for me, recognizing that, community is actually really important. Physical touch is really important. Connectivity, is really important. Intimacy is really important. That was actually a really big step for me. And it's something that kind of has just been growing in the last few months, realizing that I do have these needs and that's okay. There's no shame in that. It's not a weakness. Okay. I saw it as a weakness, as needing and wanting this. So when our needs are unmet, I mentioned before, we get these attachment style issues. So when my needs are met in the formative years, growing up by our caretakers, either inconsistently or not at all, we form different attachment styles. So and I've talked about these before in depth, the anxious attachment, the avoidant attacher, and the disorganized attacher. And really where we want to be is in secure attachment. But even when, if you've been really traumatized as a child, especially sexually, physically abused, you can do a lot of work on yourself and this can still be triggered up. So it's really, needs and wants are so important within these situations, because another thing that needs and wants allow us to put into place very strongly are our boundaries. And it's our boundaries that allows us to hold ourselves and keep ourselves safe and keep ourselves within situations where there is love and there is safety. And for people who have been very traumatized with this kind of like hard trauma of abuse, and even soft trauma of like emotional abuse over a period of time of neglect, emotional neglect and things like that. It's really, really important to be able to have boundaries in place, which means that you need to know your needs and wants. So this is why it's so important. So if you don't have your needs and wants met, and if you're not sure of what they are, then what can happen is you can become needy. Okay, so especially if your needs weren't met as a child and you've got an anxious attacher, this fear of rejection. And then when we get given something like love or attention, oh my God, we hang on to it and we need it. And then we become needy, we become grasping. Our emotion, our energy is totally in there on top, smothering this other person, who then will quite quickly start to need freedom and will pull away. And then that dance sets up. So becoming needy and wanting and grasping like that, we need to observe ourselves within it and do the work that we need to. The other thing that can happen is that we can have really low self-esteem and self-worth because we learn to believe as children that our needs and our wants aren't important. Or we have guilt and shame around having needs and wants, which is what I was saying I had. I was punishing myself and keeping myself away from I was being stoic and almost like trying to go the enlightened route, when in reality I had needs and wants and connections, and I still do have those needs and wants. but I also have boundaries. So I'm not going to take less than what I want or what I need to have my needs and wants met, if you know what I mean. Because I might go out and have a sexual need met, but in a way that is not actually meeting an emotional need. And that can actually just be a re-traumatizing experience. So there also has to be, you have to be mindful within this of how your needs and wants are met. And if they are actually being met in a way that is serving you and in that loving way. The other thing that can happen is we can become needless. So where, I don't have needs and I don't have wants, which is kind of like where I was, right? So we become needless, and we become anti-dependent. So we become really resistant to depending on other people. You can also become really resistant to meeting other people's needs because it's this whole like, well, my needs and wants aren't being met. Why the hell should I have to meet anybody else's needs and wants? Which then is like the whole chicken and egg thing. Because if you're not meeting other people's needs and wants, then your needs and wants aren't going to be met. Or if they are being met, it's going to be met in such a way that by an anxious attacher, right? If you're an avoidant attacher and you're going to that, and your anxious attacher will come in and they'll be all like loving and I'm going to like meet your needs and wants and I'm going to give you what you want. But then really what gets taken away from you is a very important need for freedom. So the other thing that can happen is we don't trust people. We don't trust people to be able to meet our needs and our wants because they weren't being met before. So you can start to see how our needs and wants when met during childhood becomes like a map for how our needs and wants get met throughout our life. And we can become quite manipulative in getting our needs and wants met. And this is a very immature response to having needs and wants met. So rather than recognizing, having boundaries in place and being able to have good conversations without guilt and shame around your needs and wants and not being attached to the outcome so that you can take yourself away. We, instead of doing all that, which is a mature reaction, a mature way to handle your life and your needs and wants, we become manipulative. So we might withhold emotion, which is, one of my traumas is having, not emotion withheld, but emotion taken away. So emotion getting taken away when you aren't, when you're disappointing the other person. And then the emotion gets withdrawn and then you're like left with this whole being rejected, not being good enough, not being worthy enough. So that then if you've had that done to you, then that becomes your way, your manipulating way of getting what you need and met, what you need and want. You can act out, you can do silent treatment, the whole passive aggressive stuff, withdrawing, withholding sex. Just there's so many immature ways that you can manipulate. And none of them are self-serving. None of them come from a place of love. And in all honesty, if you then get what you want through that, it's not very satisfying because then it kind of feels like, well, it wasn't a gift given freely. And then you resent the other person for that as well. So the first thing that you need to do is actually admit that you have needs and that you have wants, and then start to identify what those needs and wants are. So let me give you an example of a difference between a need and a want. So before I said needs are things that we need for our survival, wants are things that allow us to overflow our cup. So need might be, I need to have shelter in winter. So I need something to keep me warm, to keep me survive, right? So I mean, if we're looking at, for instance, if we're going right down to the point of like a homeless person, they might not have a home, but they need some sort of shelter to keep them safe at night, to keep them alive. They need something to keep them warm, right? So there's that bare basic need just for like shelter. So for me, I have a need of shelter, but then I have a want that shelter is beautiful, and that shelter fills me with joy, and that shelter has an amazing energy, and that shelter is my space. And for so many years, when I was in relationship, I was in relationship with a man who didn't have that same want for his need. So I would be trying to create a beautiful space, but then I would be dancing with what his needs were within that space, which is very functional. And so I would be trying to make things pretty. And then for him, it would just be an annoying thing. So like cushions on the bed, just get them off the bed. They'd be chucked into the corner. And then I would be the one that's going around and making the bed and putting the cushions back on. And I would be resenting him for that, for not having what I wanted be important enough to him for him to then also get up in the morning and put the cushions on the bed. So there was definitely a breakdown in like, my want, and that my want was not important to him, that was done. Right. So there's a lot of incompatibilities there. But rather than recognize that and speak up in the first place, and then either give him the chance to meet my wants, I would get passive aggressive about it, right? So the first thing you need to do is admit that you've got wants and needs, and then know what they are. So what are your basic needs? What are your basic needs in relationship? So surrounding like connectivity, like, do you need to be hugged and full body hugged? Do you need to have someone give you quality time? Do you need to have deep conversations with someone to have that connectivity with them? These are really important needs. Those sort of things aren't wants. For you to feel safe and secure and loved within a relationship, those sort of things are a need. So have a really deep think about, if I could have what I really, 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 really wanted, right? That's actually a need in a relationship, in my life, in my job, in my stuff. What would those needs be? And then what are my wants? What are my wants surrounding them? What is the icing on the cake? What would I love if I can have it? Then what you need to do is stop focusing on other people and start focusing on yourself. And, people think that this is selfish, but it's not, because the greatest gift we can give to the world is meeting as many of our own wants and needs as we can, right? So that we're not this needy, desperate, grasping person, but being an example of what is possible, of having our boundaries, of saying, no, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. Teaching other people how to do the same, right? And saying, well, actually, this is really important to me. Is this possible? In a mature way, gives the other person the important information that they need to be able to make a decision, rather than them trying to guess what you're thinking, rather than trying to dance around, rather than them being a victim to your passive aggressive behavior and your manipulation and you're withdrawing emotion and withdrawing sex, and then having them do the same thing to you. And it just becomes this really muddy water that you're in when you don't know what your wants and needs are, and you're not effectively communicating them, and you're not prepared to stand in your power and your boundaries within this. So one of the things you can do is notice what you give to others most, because that's a really good clue of what you want, what you need, is because you give it to others thinking that naturally it will flow back. And then when it doesn't, you resent it. So the next thing you can do is look about what you complain about, what you're complaining about to others, about your partner, about your family. What you're complaining about is often a need that you want or have, or a want that you want and have that isn't getting met. You can also question yourself about your needs. So have a look at your childhood and what were your needs that were consistently met and what were the ones that weren't. And that's the hard question, because when your needs weren't being consistently met, you're often unaware that the need is there. And that's where our wounding comes from. So, have a look at other families, other people, other things, and where they maybe had a life where their needs were met in a different way to yours, and start to realize, well, actually, that was a need that I had that wasn't met. And, it's okay that I had this need. It's not okay that it wasn't met. And start to realize that you can start to build this structure of what it is fine, what is okay to have and want in your life. So how to get your needs met in a relationship? Well, the first thing you need to do is know what they are, right? And then you need to listen to your emotions. So when stuff is being triggered up in a relationship, 100% responsibility, recognizing that this is not actually what's about happening in this moment, but it's a trigger from the past. But then also recognizing that, if I do have this need and it's not consistently being met, and this is a problem, and I've only just realized this today, actually. I was on a call in the Tantra practitioner training that I'm doing. I was on a call, and she said this thing about, it's one thing to keep doing the inner work. It's another thing to realize that, maybe I just can take myself away from the situation so I don't have to keep doing the inner work within this moment. And I was like, oh my God, this light bulb moment went off, right? Where I'm so good at taking 100% responsibility for my stuff that I will keep myself in a situation that's actually not compatible for me and is continuously re-traumatizing myself, and then taking responsibility for that and going into it over and over and over again, rather than just going, you know what? It's okay that I actually want to be connected with, and it's okay that I want to be important to a partner. That's an important need, I think. And that's not being high maintenance, and that's not being needy. And if I have someone that's willing to be intimate with me and that I'm sharing my body with, but then isn't willing to have any contact with me between those moments, then rather than keep using that as an example, like as a way to trigger the trauma so that I can do the inner work, get to the point where you can realize that process is done. And you know what? That person just is not allowed to be intimate with me because my very important needs are not being met. And that was like this big aha moment for me to say, you know what, it's okay to take yourself away from a situation. You don't always have to be the bigger person. You don't always have to be the one that is compromising. You don't always have to be the one that's biting your tongue. You can have your boundaries. And then if they're transgressed and you say, no, this is what is important to me, and that person's like, well, yeah, sorry, but you're not going to have that, then you take yourself away. And that's what a boundary is, a consequence. There's got to be a consequence to your boundary being crossed, whether it being you saying, no, I won't allow that. And then if it's still being transgressed, you're saying, well, I'm sorry, but this is no longer fulfilling me. This is no longer good for me to have in my life. And you fucking take yourself away from it, all right? And that's okay. And in fact, that's more than okay. So it's important to recognize this, to recognize these things, to be honest about what you want and need, to have your boundaries in place, to stay in your power within that, but to also not be overflowing with neediness, but be able to meet yourself and meet your needs, and then to be able to recognize the difference between giving your responsibility and your power to somebody else so that they can meet your needs all the time, and you being able to meet your needs to the point where what you do need from a person, if that's not being met, you can say, well, you know what? I'm going to take myself away, meet this need in other ways from now, maybe with my friends, and then I'm going to come back into relationship with someone when I find someone who can meet that need. So a really, really important way to find needs is to look at your addictive behaviors. And in our society, we think of as addiction as being the bad things like the drugs, the alcohol, the gambling. But we all have addictions because addictions are distractions. Addictions are a way we cover up what's really going on inside. So, for instance, I had 2 addictions. I still might have 2 addictions. But they're actually not at a point where they're addictions anymore. Now they're more observations on my part when it arises that I can work with and overcome. So I had addictions from a masculine and my feminine side inside, right? So my masculine had a workaholic addiction and my feminine had a foodaholic addiction. So my masculine would work. And this is how I grew up, right? So this was my whole childhood of working. So when I was 12, grade 8, I remember my dad lined my sister and I up. It's so funny because we were lined up. It's only 2 of us, right? But we were lined up and had this conversation with us where basically when school term was on, and I was 12, right? Grade 8. When school term was on, we were not allowed to, during school semesters at all, we were not allowed to read books or watch television. So we're allowed to, like while we're eating, the television was on, but it would be the news or something uninteresting, right? And we weren't allowed to do anything but study. Now, there's only much study a 12-year-old can do, right? So I became very manipulative and very good and cunning at hiding how. I mean, this is probably why I don't have a television, right? Because don't get me wrong, I can like binge watch with a girlfriend. And I love going to gold class in the movies, but I don't have a television in my own space of my life because I find that there's so many more interesting things that I could be doing to nurture myself and read a book, or I'm often working at night or on courses and stuff like that. So personally for me, I find if I do have a television, it sucks all of my time and my energy away. But I became very cunning at hiding reading. So I would have my study book, and then underneath it, I would have my book, my fiction book that I was reading. And then I would have my study book. I mean, see what I'm doing. I have my study book, like kind of lift it up, and I would be reading. And then when I'd hear my dad, because he used to do come this thing where he would come and he would throw the door open to see what you were doing, right, into your bedroom. Talk about having a safe space, right? And then as I heard him coming, I would just drop my textbook, and then I would just look over my shoulder and just say, "Oh, hey, Dad." And then I would keep studying, right? But meanwhile, inside, I'm like, I've gone into fight, flight, and my heartbeat's going, and am I going to get caught? Am I going to get in trouble? Because I actually don't. I'm just an A grade student, right? And there's only so much study you can do. So my addictive behaviors became working really hard, studying really hard. And, you know, it was great. It got me into dentistry. It got me through dentistry with honors. It got me, you know, through jobs, and then and has allowed me to change from dentistry to in online space. But me, it's always about the study. It's always about doing this. It's always about working. And what ended up happening was that my inner feminine was just, her needs weren't being met. And what her need became, her addictive behavior to hide her pain, was food. So the only good thing that would happen to me was when I would stop studying to eat. And that was, for me, food became love. Food became self-love. You know, I struggled for a long, long time, yo-yo dieting, and it was also then a need to be found attractive, to have my worthiness, which is what stopped me from spiraling into probably becoming quite overweight, because then I would also then be exercising and over exercising, and then not binge dieting, binge dieting. I would be eating, but then I would be like white knuckling, not eating, and not doing this stuff because I was unhappy with how my body looked and felt. So they're my addictive behaviors that were hiding my needs, my wants. They were hiding the pain that came from not having my needs and wants met. And through doing the inner work and recognizing within this in myself, now I'm very good at prioritizing and setting my own time and my own space to do stuff, and to recognize, you know what, there is work that needs to be done here, and to have a conversation with myself around that. So to let my masculine have a conversation with my feminine, saying, look, this needs to get done today, but then tomorrow we'll do this. And then making sure that tomorrow I do take that time out. I do go for that beautiful long walk. I do go to the cafe and read my book. I do spend time with my fur children. And interestingly for me, one of my things when I did leave my husband and I decorated my house was that I chose only armchairs so that there was no snuggle space, right? Because I was doing that whole, like, I wasn't allowed connectivity and intimacy. I was punishing myself, and I was like not wanting to get hurt so badly that I wasn't willing to let that into my life. And then I realized that I also had no snuggle space for my fur children, and I wasn't getting the most out of that relationship either. So I've just actually gone out, and I see my just redecorated in the corner there. I've got this beautiful chase area where I can sit and I can read and I can have my dogs with me. And perhaps one day I can have somebody else that I'm intimately connected there with me as well. So I had this need that I realized that was there, and I went out and I created it and put it into place. So have a look at your addictive behaviors. Have a look at the things that you actually think are just like, oh, well, no, I'm just working, or I'm just this, or I'm just connecting with everyone on social media, but it's this addiction, right? And rather than stopping and actually being with yourself and being fully present, you're doing this stuff. And what it's doing is it's hiding the discomfort that's actually there inside you. And until you're actually able to connect inside and sit with is what is there and start to be really real with yourself, you're not going to be able to be honest with yourself and to actually start to create exactly what it is that you want in your life. It's so funny, we don't do the work, and then we spend all this time in this pain, not having what we need and want. Whereas if we did the work, we would be able to create what we need and we want. And sure, it's painful. I call it you got to cross the river to get to the other side, right? I call it the river of poo, because it's shit when you're in it. It's painful when you're in it. Once you come through, when you've had that shift and you're feeling lighter and you're feeling joy and you're feeling good in your life, then yeah, swimming across that river of poo was so worth it. So once you've identified your addictive behaviors, you identified where your needs and wants are being met, then it's doing that inner work, and it's helping heal those areas within yourself. And this also stops you from being codependent on someone else, right? And from being needy in relationship, and from being able to find great joy just by being with yourself, and being able to plan stuff. Like, I'm now at the point where I am feeling that joy, which means I'm not going to allow anything into my life that's not going to add to that joy. And I'm also now starting to plan travel and stuff to meet my friends. I'm going, Spain and doing this stuff, but I'm doing it by myself. And there's great joy to be having that as well, and the freedom that that brings. So be prepared to speak your truth, be prepared to be in your power, to be prepared to have your boundaries, but not as a bully. Okay, that's a wall. That's aggressive. That is a avoidant attachment thing. All right, I'm really in my boundaries are really strong. No, sometimes they're just walls, right? So be prepared to speak your own truth, but in a loving way, and loving both for yourself and for that other person. When you show up loving yourself and you love that other person, sometimes to them it might not feel like love when you're saying no. But when you're saying loving in a beautiful way, you're giving them the chance to step into their own 100% responsibility and to do their own work. And maybe for them to recognize that, hey, maybe this isn't compatible for them because maybe their needs aren't being met. So, and then that stops you having to continually be what I used to be, was the chameleon, which is I was always adapting and changing and being able to give people what they needed and what they wanted so that I was staying safe, rather than giving myself what I needed and wanted to stay safe. And when you're doing that, you're never safe, all right? Because when you're giving other people what they need and want so that you can be safe, there is no safety in that, because you can never be 100% sure that you're going to get it right every time. But when you're giving yourself what you need and want, and you've got your boundaries in place, there is safety within that. And it's so much easier because all you're having to do is worry about what one person wants, not what everybody in the room wants. So you need to also assume that others are going to be there for you. And when you assume that, it happens because of the energy that you're putting out there and the people that you're attracting into your life. So assume that your needs and wants are important to the people in your life, and the ones who they're not important to will not be in your life for much longer. Because when you start saying no, when you start putting your boundaries in place, those people that were getting something from you not having boundaries and from trying to make it right for everybody else, they're going to go away. Those energy vampires are going to go find somebody else to suck the life out of. And sometimes there can be sadness in that initially, because you think it's about you and you think it's something to do with you and that whole unworthiness. But when you start to move into your power, when you start to have your boundaries in place and that whole 100% responsibility, and you realize that this person is not loving in your space, then it's a relief when they're gone, because then you can either spend time by yourself, loving yourself, or you can spend time with people who are loving and who you can love. And you can start to build this really beautiful community of people who bring joy to your life and who you bring joy to theirs. So you need to also know your non-negotiable needs, because this is really important in relationship. And I've been observing a friend for a while now who, to her family and having a family is really, really important. And she's with a partner who had decided, and I don't know if this went ahead, and I don't know where this is at now, but he decided his own woundings were preventing him from wanting to be a dad. So he decided to have a vasectomy, even though he was still quite young. And that was creating an incredible amount of pain for her, because now she had to choose between him and her need for a family. And at this point in time, she was choosing him, and she was going into that process of her wound and allowing and expressing, right? So that she could do her own inner work to get to the point where she's at peace with that. But you know what? Maybe that's not the right thing to do. And maybe you need to love this person, but then also lovingly let them go, because this thing that you have that's a need for you is actually more important. And this is the problem when we're with someone and what we're getting from them is filling a wound. Then we can't leave, because then that wound is ripped open again. And this is why we need to be able to do our own inner work, so that we're not with somebody to complete us, to heal us, that we're with somebody because they're bringing us joy and we're very compatible. And our needs and wants are either being able to be met within relationship, or we're able to meet them ourselves, or we can go, oh, that's cool. He doesn't want to come gold class to chicklet movie with me. And you know what? I don't want him to come because he's not going to enjoy it. And it's going to put a dampener on myself. So I'm going to go by myself, or I'm going to go with a girlfriend. So not expecting the poor person in your relationship to do everything with you, like go clothes shopping with you. I mean, maybe there are some guys who really enjoy that, really get off on that. But I would say 99.9% of the male population does not want to go clothes shopping with you. And they would rather be at home doing nothing than that. So we don't have to drag our poor partner into everything in our life to have this emotional need met. And we need to also realize that they are a 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, whatever we're up to now, right? Person with their own needs and wants. And we should respect them in that and allow them to have their needs and wants as well. And this is a meeting of two people who are in their power, negotiating to have their needs and wants met. And if you have a non-negotiable that they won't meet, or if they have a non-negotiable that you don't want to meet, that you're not comfortable meeting, then there's an incompatibility there. And you need to realize that from the very beginning and be able to be alone enough that you can take yourself away from situations that are not serving you. So you need to remember that people are not mind readers. People are not mind readers. All right. And this is a real thing that anxious attachers do, where we want people to read our mind and just give us everything because that's going to make us feel so worthy and lovable. But until we can actually voice what we want ourselves and let them know and in detail of how that would look to us if that was being fulfilled, then we're not going to have our needs, wants, and met. And I know that that can kind of take away the romanticism of it or the magic of it. But hell, it's better to have your need and to feel that your need and want is important by then meeting it than to have the poor person trying to guess what your need and want is and then how to meet it. And then having you get all passive aggressive when it's not being met. I think, though, the most important way that we can get our needs and wants met, and needs and wants, our weeds and wants, our needs and wants met is to teach other people how to love us in a loving way, right? And when we love ourselves enough to meet our own needs and our own wants, and when we love ourselves enough to have our boundaries, and when we love ourselves enough to respect our no and our yes, and to have non-negotiables and to not be attached to outcome. And when we love ourselves enough to take ourselves away from situations that don't serve us, then people will start to treat us with respect. And if they don't like it, they'll go away. And if they do like it, they're going to be able to meet our needs and wants. And we're going to teach them the importance of this and almost like the vibration that we bring in will allow them to elevate their vibration. And when they see us in our power, it allows them to realize and come into their power. There's something called entrainment where you, and as a practitioner, your energy and what you do allows other people to come to that point as well. And I know that when I'm working with clients, sometimes when I tell them to do something and they're doing it, and then it's like, it's not really working or it's not really feeling good. But then when I show them how to do it, then they're like, oh. So for instance, letting out rage. I'm really, really good at letting out rage now. Not in public, not in front of other people, right? I can do it for a client and I can do it for myself. Because when you let out rage, it's not a little like, it's a primordial scream from the root chakra, the sex chakra that comes out, and it's a rage, right? When you can let rage out. So when I say entrainment, when I can show a client how I can release my rage in like a pillow scream, then they can then do it. It's like crying. Sometimes I have these clients who are caught up in a cry that's very, very surface, it doesn't go deep. And it's you can feel it's very victim orientated and they're not taking responsibility and they're doing this little thing, right? No, you show them. I mean, admittedly, it's hard to show a client how to cry, right? Because I'm not crying at the time, but I can describe it to them, like, come on, and I can help them. I can work them into it, and I can trigger them into the pain that allows them to really access that really deep rooted pain and allow them to really express it, right? To express emotion and to really have a shift that allows you to move on, it is like a difficult thing. So entrainment, I help my clients by showing them and describing and triggering them into it. When you turn up in the world as someone in power with your boundaries and the people in your life see that, you're helping them to do the same thing. And then another way that you can have your needs and wants met is to make sure that you're meeting your partner's needs and wants in a way that is right for you. Obviously not not doing something that you're not comfortable with, okay? And that's where negotiation and conversation comes in. But also in relationship with friends, meeting their needs and wants, but in a way that's respectful and safe and loving to yourself. And when you can do that, when you can meet someone else's needs and wants in a way, and then they're meeting your needs and wants, this is not codependency, all right? You're still able to do your own thing. You'd be able to walk away if it no longer served you. But there becomes a beautiful energy between two people, the dance, the play of the energy, respecting each other and respecting themselves and creating this amazing environment of love and joy between them. Okay, I know that video went a lot longer than what I was anticipating, but I hope you got something out of it, and that you can sit down and have a really good think about what your needs and wants are, and maybe start to put some changes into life. First of all, how you treat yourself, observing, recognizing, and starting to maybe see maybe where you've got needs that perhaps you should be meeting yourself and not expecting others to meet, not being needy. But then maybe you've got some needs that you can expect to be met that aren't being met. And then starting to put into place some boundaries around that. Okay, have an amazing, amazing day, and I will see you, or you will see me, on the next video.